Georgia, Alabama for the national championship. Where else would a team from Athens face a team from Tuscaloosa but Indianapolis, Indiana, on a Monday night in January? I'm not going to complain about the venue. I'm not going to complain about anything. It's time to dive in and get to work here. Hey, I got a question for you. When you talk about stopping Alabama, when you talk about Georgia beating Alabama, who is Alabama? What's the identity of the team? See, a lot of times, for instance, the last game Georgia played against Michigan, you could pretty well decide Michigan was a run-first team. They work a lot of play action. There's some trickery here and there. That's Michigan. 12 times out of 12, that's Michigan. Alabama, you have no earthly idea who they are week to week. I want you to think about the stats I'm about to give you. Against Georgia in the SEC championship game, one of the reasons why a lot of you, including myself maybe, were so surprised at the outcome was because you got so much out of Alabama you had not gotten all year long. Not just to mention the up-tempo approach, not just to mention the functionality of the offense, not just to mention so many guys coming through at the right time, including that offensive line. Think about the fact that in terms of run-pass ratio, the SEC championship, Alabama ran it 26 times, they threw it 47 times. You flip the script when you go to the semifinal game. So they ran it 26 times, passed it 47 times against Georgia. They ran it 47 times and passed it 28 times against Cincinnati. That is a total inversion over a one-game scenario of Alabama's offensive identity. Nobody else out there does that. No one's capable of doing it. It took a long time for this Alabama team to get to this point. They're so young. Kind of side note, been trying to tell you, this is the team you got to clip. If you're going to get them, get them. A&M did. Will Georgia get them? I'm fascinated by this because as you dive into like what it takes to win, both teams have seen the path at this point. When we were going into Atlanta, we could not say that about Bama. Like Bama had not seen Georgia lose. Bama was an underdog against Georgia. But now we're in the national championship game. Think about this. As we dive into the preview, both teams have seen the path. Bama has seen the path because they blazed it. They beat Georgia. So there is no more guesswork. Can it happen? Yeah, we did it already about a month ago. So Alabama beat Georgia already. But even though Georgia hasn't beaten Alabama, everything that Georgia needs to have happen, they've seen happen like 2 or 3 times. First off, A&M flat out beat Alabama. Florida nearly did it. But if Georgia does anything remotely along the lines of what LSU was able to do to Alabama or what Auburn was able to do to Alabama, Georgia will win the national championship. What a mouthful, by the way. Georgia will win the national championship. I know a lot of you who are not emotionally tied into this thing, if you're not like a Georgia fan, you're just watching and saying, oh, someone will win Monday night. Hey, if Bama wins, they just kind of chunk it on top of the pile of national championships they already have. If Georgia wins Monday night, you may be so caught up in the fact that, oh, they finally beat Alabama, you may not even immediately realize, hold up, they also won a title. They haven't done that since, flips through the book, 1980. This would be historic if Georgia wins. What do they need to do? What does Georgia have to have happen in this football game? Well, it's quite simple in theory. It's a lot more difficult to execute. Pretty simple in theory. You don't have to go back far. What would it be at the time of kickoff, about 9 days prior? They did everything they need to do. It was just against Michigan that they did it. They controlled the line of scrimmage, which we cannot say they did against Alabama. They consistently pressured the quarterback, which we cannot say they did against Alabama. They ran the ball for better than 5 yards per carry, which we cannot say they did against Alabama. And therefore, thankfully, this is one of the last times I'll say this, they afforded Stetson Bennett the luxury of passing rather than put him into necessary passing situations. Now, those are 4 very simple boxes to fathom. They are infinitely more difficult to check, especially a critical mass of them. You can't just do 1 or 2. You need all of them. I would not worry about shutting Alabama down. There's a lot of talk out there about what Georgia's defense needs to do to shut Alabama down. Nothing. Don't worry about it. Are you only planning on hanging 3 points or 7 points? If the answer is yes, don't even bother showing up. Georgia can score. Georgia probably should expect to put out a better offensive production number than they did against Alabama last game. But look, if you're going to get into the mid-20s, upper 20s, if you're going to be able to score even to that degree, you don't have to shut Alabama down. What you have to make sure you do is, number one, don't let their best beat you. Certainly. I mean, there's going to be a lot spoken about Jamison Williams and the impact he's going to have on this game. Bryce Young, especially his scramble ability. But look, if you can just focus on havoc, pressure, in other words, and if you can just focus on forcing high leverage situations, Bryce Young's going to make you pay in some of those. But it's a whole lot more advantageous if you're making him beat you on 3rd and 9 with someone other than number 1, Jameson Williams, than it is just sitting there 3rd and 4 picking you apart. Because it's a 2-down situation virtually every time when they're 3rd and manageable anyway. That's what Georgia needs. There's some other more intricacies that we can get into in just a second, but on the surface, that's really what Georgia needs. Can they do it? Remains to be seen. What does Alabama need here? You might say, well, they just need a replay of the SEC championship. That's not the way football works. They score in 3s and 7s in this game. So theoretically, one bounce of the ball could equal a swing in 14 points. You know, I was watching the replay of the SEC championship, by the way, because I'm always fascinated at how a change in the trajectory of a game, just 1 degree, when you span it over 4 quarters, can make a 3-touchdown gulf on the scoreboard. You know, in this game, it was 10-0 Georgia, and Bama was facing a 3rd and 2. That was the long touchdown to Williams. But I'm sitting there thinking the opposite. I'm thinking, what if they had a false start and it backed up, and then they just there's an incomplete pass, or it's a throw to the sideline, short of the sticks, 4th down, Bama punts. That stuff could just as easily happen. It didn't happen in the SEC championship game. What I'm saying is, when you claim that, all you got to do is do what you did in Atlanta the first time, that's not the way it works, okay? So this is an entirely separate game. They reset the scoreboard. You got more injuries on the Bama side. You're probably healthier on the Georgia side. And among those injuries, potentially along the offensive line for Alabama, John Mechie certainly out in this game. More on that in just a second. So what does Bama need? They need, well, theoretically what they had the first time. They need tempo. They need volume. They do not need to settle in to this game. They need to attack. It needs to be a pinball game. They've got to get volume plays. That's what they need. They need Georgia defensively on the field. They need to get as many looks early on. They need to let Bryce Young throw the ball as many times as possible. You've got the better quarterback. You've got the best skill guy. You got to let him work. You got to let him work. But speaking of that skill guy, to me, this is one of the critical factors of this game. It's not that hard to figure out. Number 1 in Crimson, Jameson Williams, all the attention will be on him. In fact, if I were Georgia, I would almost be arrogant in my approach. I would look at him and say, you will not beat us with him. That is not going to happen again. And look, if you think you got someone else over there that was in high school this time last year that's going to beat us, we'll tip our cap to you. If you're able to pull that off, we'll tip our cap to you. We don't think you can run it on us successfully. And quite frankly, we really don't care if you try, because once we get you in the red zone, you are not going to break the goal line running the ball on us. And we're not going to let you do it with number 1. I don't care what we have to dedicate to it. You are not going to beat us with Jameson Williams. Which begs the question, your passing attack, let's play a little fill-in-the-blank game. Your passing attack, if you're Alabama, consists of Jameson Williams and then there's the blank. Now, I'll tell you where I think most people would go. Most people would go, I don't know, Slade Bolden, nice possession type receiver. That's okay, Slade Bolden's not beating anyone. Let's Ja'Cory Brooks. He's come on strong, right? He has, yeah. Ja'Cory Brooks is a good option. And then you got some other names like Christian Leary, JoJo Earl. These are names that have promising futures. You know what I think is going to happen in this game? I think we're going to have a little repeat of that 2015 national championship game. That one was out in Glendale, Arizona. There was a guy who had all-world potential, had a bunch of stars next to his name coming out of high school. He had played the whole year. It's just he had not been leveraged in the pass game. For whatever reason, he had not been leveraged in the passing game. You'll see Jameson Williams Monday night, but I'll tell you the other name that, if my mind is right here, could end up popping on the stat sheet, and that's Jaleel Billingsley, the tight end, number 19 for Alabama. I think that's the guy, because you see, I have zero doubt in my mind there'll be a ton of attention paid to Jameson Williams. I have zero doubt in my mind Georgia will force the issue with the blitz, and therefore, I have very little doubt in my mind there will be some fairly glaring mismatches out there. Georgia's banking on the fact that you can't take advantage of them because you won't have time, but they know there is a price they pay when they bring extra pressure and they dedicate extra resources to Jameson Williams. There will be a mismatch, and I think it's going to be on Jaleel Billingsley. And if I'm Georgia, if I'm Dan Lanning, if I'm Kirby Smart, even if I listen to myself say that, I'd say, all right, I'm going to make him show me. Jaleel Billingsley has not been a focal point of that passing game all year. We know what he said. We know what was said about him in preview magazines, but the film doesn't tell us that. But you know what? The film didn't tell you that about O.J. Howard until your eyeballs told you that right there on the field. He did it twice, actually, in national championship games. One play changes this thing. Either way, when you got games played in the 20s, which is where the Vegas total tends to believe this will be played, one play either way. Jaleel Billingsley, last game it was Jamison Williams streaking wide open. Who knows? Maybe it's that O.J. Howard style tight end down the seam in this kind of game. I would watch Jaleel Billingsley. The prop bets out there when they're released, I'll be on an over yardage total receiving for Jaleel Billingsley. There's this other aspect of the game that's going to be talked about a whole lot. It's the mental aspect. It's the psychological aspect. If you watch this show, we don't talk a lot about it because I really think it's severely overblown most of the time. There is a psychological edge in sports. It just rarely works the way that people who sit at a desk behind a microphone think it does. And I'll include myself in that. That's why I don't waste time talking about it. There is an exception to the rule. More oftentimes it's in the NFL than college because I believe that more oftentimes the mental edge matters in a rematch situation than it does the first time the game's played. And you rarely get rematches in college. Well, we got one here. You get them all the time in the NFL. Every division opponent you play at least twice. But here, we've got something we rarely get. Now, here's where I think it comes into play. The first game, Georgia goes up 10-0, as we said, as you saw, and then Bama comes back. So it really didn't bother Alabama all that much. But I do wonder this. I do wonder what happens if the shoe's on the other foot a little bit here. I do wonder, after fully believing in yourself, if you're Georgia, that you've rectified the problems, we're going to have a different approach, different foot forward here. You've got that voice in the back of your mind. You got those voices out there that have told you there's just something about Bama you can't beat. Now, you've done well enough to block it out. It's been a month now, and you got your mojo back. You beat Michigan. But I've been behind these sidelines before when a lot of that evaporates because of what's happened in the first quarter of a game. Bama didn't have a problem with a 10-0 deficit. I really wonder how Georgia would handle a 10-0 deficit here. Because number one, all that doubt tries to creep back in. You got to be extremely mentally tough to block it out. Number two, what have we gotten ourselves into there? If Bama's got an early lead, we've got ourselves at least into the area where we are tempted to try and play catch-up. And to play catch-up, you have to throw the ball. Thus, out of necessity, instead of luxury, Stetson Bennett is putting the ball in the air. That does not work out well for them. It has never worked out well for them against Alabama. We've seen it multiple times. Stetson Bennett, they can win a title with him. They will not win this game if they're having to disproportionately rely on his arm. So there's a lot more nuance to the question, can Georgia win one with Stetson Bennett, than just a yes or no. It's yes and no, and then there's a lot of conditions behind it. But I do think that mental edge matters way more in this particular game than it does 99 times out of 100. A couple of wild card factors that I'm keeping an eye on here. The first one is the Georgia yards per carry number. Last game, I want to say it was 3.6 yards per carry. At least 4.0. At least. I would prefer it be 4.5 or higher, but at least 4.0 is probably a line in the sand I draw. If you are not clicking along at over 4 yards per carry, I'm not saying it's impossible to win. You are putting yourself behind the proverbial 8 ball if you're going to try and win that thing. Now, you may dominate special teams. You may have a couple of defensive scores that we could never see coming. But if this game's just played straight up and special teams is a relative wash and neither defensive unit puts points on the board and you're not doing it better than 3.8, 3.9 yards per clip, Georgia is probably going to lose. The other thing I would look at, and it kind of correlates with that, how many 3rd and 5+ situations does Georgia face offensively? Partly because that means we're going to find out on 3rd down how often they have to rely on Stetson Bennett throwing the ball. Secondly, I wonder how much more aggressive they may be on 4th down in this game. They made a decision that a lot of people disagreed with down in the red zone, I think it was. At the very least, it was plus territory in the last game, and it didn't work out for them. I'd be interested in that because I don't think they've wavered a whole lot in their thinking, just analytically in their thinking in those scenarios. How about Alabama? I'll give you another factor in this game that I think could be huge. Their defenders, their secondary guys, specifically at corner, have not played the ball in the air well. They just haven't. And they didn't against Georgia. They won in spite of it almost. In fact, there were a couple of times where I saw, it feels like they had 500 flags thrown on them for PI, but there were a couple of times where you almost watch it and you say, well, you know what? Yeah, I gave up 15 yards, probably better than the alternative. Like you're almost resigning yourself to, well, they weren't going to play the ball in the air. They weren't going to defend it properly. Hey, at least they didn't give up a touchdown. And it ended up paying off for them. Look, if I'm Georgia, there are ways to attack Alabama through the air. There are ways for Stetson Bennett to try and attack Alabama that are very high reward and I would say marginal risk at best. And that is putting some air under the ball and just throwing it up to George Pickens and throwing it up to Darnell Washington. They scored a touchdown doing that with Washington down near the goal line last game. I'd do it half a dozen times. Jermaine Burton can do this as well. I would just see what's there. That is backyard, sandlot, pickup football. That's 8-on-8 play calling. I would do it. Because, listen, if they make it that basic, there's no reason for you to make it any more complex than that. So with all that said, let's dive into what the model thinks. So last time we leaned a little bit Georgia. We adjusted, of course. Not only have we taken the SEC championship game into account, but we've also baked the semifinals into account. We have upgraded Alabama as a team fairly significantly. There is the possibility that Alabama is Clemsoning right now. That used to be a bad thing. Now it's a good thing. There is the possibility that they are in ascension mode very late in the year, and they're just peaking at the right time. If that's the case, our model is still underselling Alabama. Having said that, I think we've adjusted for where they are right now fairly effectively. We've got the game at a pick'em. The number in Vegas is anywhere from 2.5 to 3 right now. Caesars, as of today, has it at Georgia minus 2.5. We've got it at a pick'em. Went back and forth on this a few times this week. You remember immediately after the SEC championship game, I sat right here and I held up that sign. I'm sorry, Nick Saban. I won't doubt you again. Merry Christmas, I think it said. I'm having to weigh that against me thinking that, yeah, it's hard to win a rematch. I think that may be a little overblown, but no, it's not the easiest thing in the world. I think there were some mental edges Alabama had in the first game that maybe not as sharp this game. They may still be there. You got Will Anderson on your sideline, you got Bryce Young on your sideline, and you got Nick Saban on your sideline. And you know what? I could find several edges for Georgia, but when it came down to it, I could not shake that. I could not shake that we're going to have a neutral site game featuring teams I've already seen this year. And I watched the Crimson team win by, 3 possessions. But that Crimson team still has the best quarterback, still has the best head coach, and still has the best overall player on its sideline. That sounds like a basketball strategy. It's a little more complex than that in football. But look, if I think a game's going to be close, those things matter. Those things really matter. And so I'm going to roll with Alabama to cover, and I'm going to roll with Alabama to win. That is another national championship for Nick Saban. That would be what? He's in his 9th game overall. This would be his 7th at Alabama, his 8th title overall. Insanity. So if Alabama wins, then it's just more history. If that is not to happen, and if Georgia does win this game, you're talking about the Braves winning a World Series and Georgia winning a national championship within a few months span. I don't know that I could go back home. They may just shut the state down for a little while. I don't know how long it would be before the thoroughfares opened up and I could get back in my home state. That would be a very, very extended party, prolonged in nature. And you will think about all the things that will have been knocked down, like 5 Berlin Walls fall down. The Kirby not being able to beat Saban Berlin Wall, the Georgia not being able to win a title, just the Georgia over Alabama thing in general. And then there's already a significant portion of the Georgia sports curse Berlin Wall that's broken down. The Falcons, they kind of strengthened it a few years ago. The Braves knocked part of it down. Georgia could just dynamite the whole thing now. Either way, we're going to see history. But I will wrap it with this. Sounds kind of ominous. It's not. I genuinely feel this way. This is a must-win game for Georgia. I believe it with every fiber in my being. Alabama is as vulnerable this year as you have seen them. Alabama is as young versus one of the most experienced Georgia teams you will see. They had the best path they will have had this year, being Georgia, all year long. This is an ideal situation. Alabama's offensive line is hobbled. Georgia's strength is their defensive front. They are healthier in the ground game. It's all there. It's all there. If you cannot get this done in this spot, I'm not going to say you never can. That's clickbait stuff. I'm going to tell you, you will have missed the most golden opportunity in the Kirby Smart tenure if they can't get it done. So I guess all that's left for them to do is get it done. But that's the preview. We will look forward to seeing all you guys in Indianapolis this Monday night.